What's up, my friend? Abby here, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Abby, where I answer your writing questions and help you make your story matter. In case you're new around here and you're not sure how this works, here's the deal. You ask me questions and I show up here on YouTube once a month to answer those questions, and there are two ways to submit questions to the show. The first way is to hit the join button below this video, get on the inside of the YouTube community, look for the Ask Abby post in the community tab, and post your questions there in the comments section. The second way is to go to patreon.com/AbbieEmmons, get inside the Inner Circle group and post your question there. Just make sure you hashtag it Ask Abby so that I see it. Okay, some fantastic questions came in over the past month and I'm really excited to answer those. So roll that intro and let's get started. Why does your story matter? Good question. What if I told you that there's a science behind every great story? I don't just teach you how to write. I teach you how to change the world with your story and make your author dreams come true. First question comes from Sarah Ann. Hello, Abby. I have a problem where I have ideas for characters, theme, and even scenes for stories, but no real plots. How do you come up with a plot to go along with your character and themes? Thank you for your help. My muddled head thanks you in advance. So believe it or not, I get this question a lot. So much. And I think where a lot of writers get stuck on coming up with a plot is they think that a plot has to be really elaborate, or they have to see the whole picture. They have to see it start to finish, every single plot point, every single part of the 3-act story structure or whatever story structure you're following. They think it has to be something big and grand and epic and complicated. But it doesn't need to be complicated. It can be very, very simple. It's really just a premise. It's that first push that gets your protagonist outside their comfort zone, that makes them confront their fear in order to get the thing that they've always wanted. Okay, that's really what you're setting up here. You've probably heard me say this a lot. The plot is the external journey and the story is the internal journey that the characters go on. So it's great that you've started with the internal journey, the internal conflict of your characters, the themes that you want to write, the big ideas that you want to share through your character's journey, because that's honestly the hardest part. That's the part that a lot of writers miss out on because they're focusing too much on crafting a epic plot. But once you have their internal conflict, their desire, fear, and misbelief, you now have all the ingredients to set up a great external conflict. Basically, what you want to ask yourself is, what external events could happen that would now force this character into the ring with their greatest fear? Or how could they be given the opportunity to get the thing that they desire the most in life? If you're still stuck, I would highly recommend checking out my video sharing my story smoothie method of coming up with a plot by drawing inspiration from various other sources that you have found creatively inspiring and taking those ingredients to create your own unique thing that's never been done before. But it's also worth mentioning, and you'll see in that video, that pretty much every plot has already been done before. Right? Almost every story we encounter is in some part a variation of a story that we've seen somewhere else with different characters, a different setting, a different time period, a different theme. A lot of plots repeat themselves, and that's okay. So it's not about finding a unique plot that's never been done before. It's about figuring out why your plot matters specifically to your main character because of their internal conflict. That's what's going to make your plot unique. For me, with my own writing process, usually plots come to me as just a flash of an idea. And that's why I call them more of like a premise than a plot, because I don't necessarily have the whole thing right away. But I do think of there will be something that inspires me, kind of like just hits me out of nowhere, like, oh, that would be an interesting situation to write about, or that would be an interesting challenge for these characters to go through. And really, that's what you're looking for, is something that can be the agent of change in your character's life. They have to be forced to go on a journey, right? An internal journey, but also an external journey. So that spark of the premise, that push that gets them outside their comfort zone, that is what you're looking for. And you'll be surprised by, once you have the first push, The rest will just come to you. Okay, next question comes from Julie B. My question is about trigger warnings for novels. My story starts lighthearted, but covers a lot of heavy topics as it progresses. I don't want to spoil a story, but I also want anyone reading to be prepared in case it's a sensitive subject. What is your perspective on how they should be used? Thank you. Okay, so first of all, if it's a central part of your book, if it's going to be a pretty important part of your plot, this potentially sensitive subject, then you're probably going to end up describing it in the blurb, at least somewhat. So in the blurb or in the description for your book, you want to definitely give your reader a clear idea of what kind of story they're going into, what are they going to encounter in this story, and if you can even just hint at some of the heavier themes that could be potentially triggering. A lot of people who are triggered by those themes or by that subject matter will be able to determine pretty quickly whether or not this book is for them. Another thing that I would recommend doing is writing up a content guide going over all of the potentially sensitive subjects, and you can find a good basis for this on movie review websites like IMDb. Usually there will be a content guide for movies that go over potentially sensitive subjects that could be triggering for some people, and you can just make your own version of that. I've done this for my own books, and I especially recommend doing this for your ARC readers, because ARC readers, a lot of times they want to know the content of your book before they commit to reading it to give you a review. And the last thing you want is for your ARC reader to be unpleasantly surprised by what's in your book and leave you a bad review because of it. So I just put my content guide in a Google Doc and I linked it in my Goodreads description for my book. You can't link external web pages in your Amazon description or other retail websites, but what you can do is add a short line of text at the bottom of your book description, which summarizes the content of your book, and maybe give it a rating based on a familiar rating system in your country. For example, I have a line of text at the bottom of my book blurb on Amazon which says, "This book is rated PG for mild language and thematic elements, no strong language, recommended for ages 13 plus." So if you're indie publishing and you have the freedom to do this, I would recommend doing that. Okay, next question is from Mel. Do you have any advice for writing a desire, fear, misbelief for a character that gets kidnapped at the beginning of the book? I've been having trouble figuring this out because usually the journey the character goes on starts because the character made a choice. But how would that work here? How would the character have a meaningful arc in this situation? I've been wondering about this for a while, but I haven't been sure of how to put it into words until now. So basically, paraphrasing, you're asking, how do you make a character active when they really have no control or no choice over what's happening to them? How do they make active decisions based on their internal conflict? And that's a great question, because there are a lot of stories where you will have these external events kind of putting this main character into a victim situation. But they can't be a helpless victim, because we cannot root for a helpless victim. We need to see them being active and making active choices based on their internal conflict, right? That's what makes us care about them. So my first piece of advice here would be to raise the stakes beyond life or death. And this is something that I talked about in my live training on creating conflicted characters, which you can find right here. But in that training, I talked about how life or death scenarios are really not strong enough. I know it sounds contradictory, it sounds ironic, because it seems like nothing is more crucial than a life or death scenario. But that's not what makes us care specifically for a unique protagonist, because it could be anyone, right? We could be following any one of the characters in your story that are getting kidnapped, because they're all facing the same stakes. So how is your main character facing different stakes? How can you raise the stakes for her? What will she do if she survives? That's a good question to start thinking about. The next thing I would do is find opportunities for your character to make active choices. Okay, even though she's in a situation where she's the victim of what's happening to her, she can still make active choices, and watching her fight and overcome obstacles will make us connect more with her. For example, putting herself in danger to save someone else, or planning an escape even if it fails, or trying to solve the mystery of why she was kidnapped. The thing is, passive victims are boring to read about because it makes for a passive viewing experience, a passive reading experience, because the external punches of the plot are really what's running the show here, okay? It's not your main character. So you want to avoid that. You want your character to find every opportunity she can to make an active decision, even if it doesn't work out the way she planned it. Those are the opportunities you have to showcase her internal conflict. A great example of this that immediately springs to mind is the classic The Count of Monte Cristo. If you've been living under a rock, it focuses on a man who is falsely accused and imprisoned, who then acquires a fortune, escapes from prison, and goes about exacting revenge on his enemies. So very early on in the story, he becomes an active character, an active hero of his own story, not just the victim of what happened to him. As far as the desire, fear, and misbelief goes, it could really be anything. Anything that you feel passionate writing about, any character traits, personality traits that you personally want to write and that matter to you. That to me is the most important thing. It has to be something that's attractive to you, right? It has to inspire you and make you passionate to write it. And this scenario could be challenging for almost any internal conflict. It's not, like I said, it's not so much about what the character chooses to do at the very beginning. Something can externally happen to them and affect their life in a bad way. But what do they choose to do beyond that point? How do they make active choices to get out of that situation? And what will they do if they survive? What does survival mean to them? Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that sparks some ideas. Okay, that's it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for submitting these questions. I hope that you found value in my responses. If you would like us to submit a question to the show, like I said, there are two ways to do that. The first is to hit the join button below this video, get inside the YouTube community and leave your question in a comment on the community post. The second way is to go to patreon.com/AbbieEmmons, get inside the Inner Circle group and post your question there. Make sure you hashtag AskAbbie so that I see it, and maybe next time I will answer your questions. Smash that like button if you liked this video, and be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I post writing videos every single Wednesday, and I would love to have you here in the community. Until next week, my friend, rock on. And it's also what creates, I think, a better connection between the characters.
Yes.
And like relationships that we can really fall in love with. Same thing with the Avengers, actually, but we won't even go into that in this episode.
Right.
But the relationships between your characters, there's some magic there when you start exploring the flaws of each character, you know, like the